Welcome to Ambivalent Offenders. Hello and welcome to part 2 of Czarina Alexandra's story. Thanks for joining us today on Ambivalent Offenders and listening. As always, we appreciate our listeners, both old and new. If you don't follow us on Instagram, I would recommend that as a place to start with social media, just because we share short videos on related topics. Erin, I know you just posted one.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we share clips, we share some funny reels, we share when the new episodes drop. So that's a great place to start.
Yep. And we've even started doing polls. If you go on there now, you'll see a poll for my next one, if I'm going to do Elvis or Rasputin. So you can go and put your opinion there.
If you want to have input, we love to hear from you. So yeah, go check us out on Instagram and follow, and all those fun stuff.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, share with other people. We love, obviously, continuing to grow our audience because it's fun to talk history stuff and all that with everybody. So we really appreciate that. We also on Instagram have our giveaway. We have our beautiful tote bag with our logo on it, as well as a mug with our logo on it. So that drawing will come up this Friday. The instructions are all on Instagram on the post on how to do that. Basically, it's as simple as liking the post, sharing it, and following us. So
we all love swag. We all love tote bags. We all have shit that we need to put in tote bags. So
we all drinking coffee or tea or something.
If you're not, then you're better than us.
Exactly. And then last thing I want to just plug is we also have our Patreon, which also comes with some fun perks. There will be extra content, exclusive content. So some short episodes that I talked about last week. So sometimes it'll be just me or Erin or both of us on a person who, we can't quite fill a whole show. So we'll have like a minis, or the minis might even have a certain theme that's a little off topic from our kind of judgment theme, I guess. And then I would say one of the biggest perks are more giveaways, and then also once a month having a full-on new episode that's exclusive to our Patreon listeners. There's those 2 tiers, $3 and $5 a month. So if you want to do that, you can, on our Instagram page, we have a link, or you can just go on Patreon and search for Ambivalent Offenders. So we just hope you continue to follow us, listen to us wherever you listen to your podcast. We know we've been having a blast so far, so we really hope you are enjoying listening along.
Yeah. We were just talking, it's wild that people are out there in the wild listening to us.
Yeah, and just our mom.
Yeah.
Hi, Mom.
Hi, Mom.
My mom texted today.
My mom?
Our mom, sorry. To our listeners of that. Everybody's mom.
It can be. She would be. Our collective mother. Our collective mother is listening.
Yep. Our podcast mom.
Our podcast mom. Hi, podcast mom.
So podcast mom texted me that she was listening to our Nixon episode. And I was like, oh, my mom. Sorry, podcast mom does not like history. She's not a history fan. She said she'd listened to the Carolyn series, and now she was listening to Nixon. She said she's starting with the mom ones, get based because of her aversion to history. But the fact that we've gotten her to listen to a few hours of history-related stuff.
That's a win right there. We could shut this down right now. Okay,
exactly. That's the sole reason for having a podcast.
Yeah.
But it's fun, to think about people out there besides just our friends and family, though we do appreciate our friends and family as well. So today for part 2, I'm going to break it up into a few what I'm going to call chapters that will not always go chronologically with Alexandra's story, although I'll do the best I can to keep it somewhat chronologically. I'm going to start off with Alexandra as a mother because we ended with Alexei being born and the discovery of him having hemophilia, especially her as a mother when her children are young. I'm going to move into her and Nicholas's beliefs on the autocratic system, the monarchy, and then move into early conflicts, so the Russo-Japanese War and Bloody Sunday, and then Rasputin. you might have noticed it's a lot to cover. So I actually did decide to make this a 3-parter.
Our first baby's first 3-parter.
No, I didn't want to, but I knew if we did it all in one, it would be like a 3-hour tour. 3-hour
3-hour tour. Yeah. I think the point of the podcast is to dive. I don't know, I say deep dive, but I don't want to do a whistle stop tour of our figures.
I've never heard that term.
Whistle stop?
I like it.
We don't want to just give you the basics that you could read on Wikipedia and such.
Exactly.
We want to do our deep dive. So I think 3-part is sufficient for covering somebody as complex and covers as many events in history as Alexandra.
Right. She happens to be a part of so many people's lives, key people in history like Queen Victoria and obviously Nicholas II, and then all these world events. And so once I was ready to go on to World War I, I'm like, okay, this needs to stop here.
Yeah, I thought it was ambitious to think that you could cover it into
today. As I was finishing up, I was like, no, this is not going to happen. But hopefully you'll listen to all 3 parts. The big thing, like Aaron was saying, I think the biggest part of what we want to do here is really make their story human. And even if we decide ultimately, like Nixon, that they still are more villainous than not, that they deserve their reputation, we still want to give them their due, their life. I know, like, for example, with Nixon, there were a lot of tragedies and things that I didn't know that happened in his early life. So we really do want to make it, as Aaron said, not just an encyclopedia entry. We want to tell the story.
Yeah, absolutely.
And then the last thing, like I said earlier, last episode, this is obviously not an exhaustive history of all these events. I'm not going to go into detail. Well, today I'm not going to cover World War I, but when we do, I'm not going to go into all the causes or talk about like the beginning of the Bolsheviks. I'm going to give context, of course, that's needed, but I want to keep the lens on Alexandra and the imperial family the best I can.
Yeah, I think that's important because a lot of the times that's why Alexandra gets lost in the mix, because there's so much going on and so many figures who perhaps are, as we'll talk about today, Rasputin and even her children, they tend to overshadow her. So I think it's important to not get lost in talking about dates and battles and keeping the focus on her specifically. Yeah.
I tried to do that the best I could, and you can let me know, or Aaron can let me know, or everybody can let me know how well I did with that. We left off, as we go into chapter 1, I can tentatively call this Alexandra and Alexei, although it could be Alexei ... and her daughters. But Alexei's going to be the biggest piece here. We left off with Alexandra finally giving birth to the long-awaited heir, Albazarevich, to the Russian imperial throne. She had had 4 daughters. This was the moment. Finally, they had their heir. However, as we also mentioned at the end of last episode, all is not well within the imperial family, as Alexei has inherited hemophilia from his mother, who was a carrier of the disease, thanks to some royal inbreeding. Again, marrying your first cousin, and when your cousin's a carrier, and then you keep bringing it all around.
It's shocking that continuing to marry your first cousin brings such chaos to the bloodline. I am shocked.
And for those who maybe forgot, just a quick little definition on hemophilia. Basically, it's a rare disease you're born with. It's part of your DNA. It's on the X chromosome, which really the big reason I just say that is men tend to show symptoms. Women tend to be carriers. So like Alexandra, for example, was a carrier of the disease. She didn't have any of the symptoms. Alexei, unfortunately, showed symptoms. So what that meant was his blood does not clot. So little cuts can take days and days to finally stop bleeding. The bigger issue is that internal bleeding. Many people who were, again, part of Queen Victoria's line, died young after falls off horses, things like that, because they were internally bleeding and they just hemorrhaged to death. I did mention at the end of last one, they discover his condition when he began to bleed from his navel for days when he's 6 weeks old.
That was after they removed the umbilical cord, I believe, or something.
I'm
or
sure
something
it was
with that.
something related to it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Obviously, Alexandra is completely devastated. She had seen others in her family who had this. She had known her brother had it, even though he died when she was very young.
I can't imagine, especially for her. She's such a nervous person, a paranoid person. And then to know that you did your greatest accomplishment, but then it is your bloodline. It's technically your fault. I can't imagine the guilt that would just completely absorb you.
I don't even think there's a word for that level of devastation. So naturally, she is going to be a very, very overprotective mom, which, depending on how you're thinking, that might seem weird, or not weird, but make a negative, or might be like, yeah, that makes complete sense, because being the heir to the throne and him having this very rare and dangerous disease.
Yeah, I don't fault her for that, because as we talked about, there's no cure. There's so much hope riding on him. Again, only son, and we talked about in the last episode that because of laws put in after Catherine the Great, that it's difficult for a woman to rule. We'll say that.
Yeah.
So it's a lot. I can't imagine somebody who is very even-keeled compared to her doing that. But then you add in her disposition for
kind of nervous, anxious, already prone to being overprotective and being that person, basically working herself to death. As Alexei grows and he begins to crawl and be on the move, as every parent knows, toddlers are, they're not the most elegant creatures.
No.
Right? They bump into everything. They aren't thinking about anything. So you can imagine the issue here. Seemingly every bump led to these telltale dark blue bruises, and Alexei would scream and cry as the blood refused to clot under his skin, and it formed these horrible, horrible swellings, right? Because the blood has nowhere to go. So as a mother myself, I can imagine how helpless Alexandra must have felt.
Yeah.
I know from my experience, when my son was diagnosed with being speech delayed and autism, how helpless I felt, because there was nothing I could do, right? There's not a cure for those things. There's no pill, there's no things like that. And how much I cried and wished I could do anything to help my son, especially with the speech part, being like, wanted to give anything just to hear him talk. He does talk now, which a very, I don't want to tear up. It's a very amazing thing. That's my miracle. But with this hemophilia, obviously this is something that's in the DNA. This isn't going to go away.
Yeah. And I feel for her because, as you said, I'm not a mother, but I can imagine being in that spot where you feel so helpless and feel like you can't do anything. And as we said, she's already predisposed to anxiety to be put in this position. That's kind of the worst case scenario. It confirms your worst fears. We'll just say that. From here on out, I know that she'll do some things that we'll judge her for, but I don't think anybody who isn't in her position knows. It's the same thing that we talked about last episode. Well, our last figure, Carolyn Bessette Kennedy, that unless you're in there, you don't know. You don't know what it feels like to be in that fishbowl.
Yeah, exactly. So biographer King that I had mentioned last week, one of my main sources, I want to quote him. I think he has a really powerful quote here. And not that it's a surprising quote, but I do think it really touches on that depth of despair it brought upon Alexandra. I'm going to quote from him. So, quote, "No tragedy affected Alexandra as deeply as her son's hemophilia. Alexandra lived through its realities daily, experienced its terrible uncertainty every hour, every day for the rest of her life. She could never forget it." End quote. That says it right there.
Yeah.
Like, every moment she's either worrying about him or dealing with this. And
well, you think it. Every mom is in it daily.
Right. Worrying about their kids.
Yeah. And this isn't a whole new level. So I think as a mother, you can totally sympathize with her. I do not blame her for what she does next. I know we'll be talking about how she finds ways to help him in some ways and help her. Again, I think there's a lot of blame that goes around for her, but I think we're all coming at it from our 21st century view, right, from the viewpoint that she was at.
Right. Or not even looking at it through the lens as a mother. And I know there's always going to be this conflict in her story about what is public and what is private, and the imperial family not always being the most people smart about it. Like when they think it's a private matter, in reality, it's actually a public matter.
Yeah. And I know we'll talk about this, but I know at this time, from what I've read, their world, which is already small, grows much smaller because they're trying to protect him and then trying to keep his disease as a secret. So even the girls and Alexandra and Nicholas, that world shrinks in, and it wasn't a big world to begin with.
No. Erin helped me with some research. Thank you, Erin.
Yeah.
You had found this piece that the average age for a hemophiliac to live at that time was 13 years. And again, I had mentioned earlier, she had seen many in her family and extended family die young from this disease. So Gertie has that feeling that he is going to die young, but she's going to do everything in her power to not let that happen. So, moving on in the same vein, though. Last episode, I mentioned that the Romanov family really needed a good PR person, not to necessarily spin things, but to actually tell the public things that they were doing. Here's another spot where they really could have benefited. Erin already hinted at it, brought it up. They, the Tsar and Czarina, saw Alexei's condition as a private family matter, and they kept it a secret from the Russian people. A circle of silence surrounded the family. And as Erin said, well, before they were already sticking very much to themselves and not having this huge social circle.
Yeah, I think it's important. Yeah, Alexandra did not necessarily approve of the decadence of the Russian court. So she was already at odds with the nobility. And then you add in this piece where if you're already distrustful of people, those aren't the people that you're going to go to in your hour of need.
Yes. So they do not at all mention his condition or that he has a condition of any kind. They keep this completely. Biographer King notes that this is what he says is a fatal mistake, as it, quote, alienated them from public affection, which makes sense, right? People would have maybe had questions or been fearful for the future of Russia, but they would also sympathize with having a son who has this disease.
I think in most recent memory, I think a lot of people would relate this. I would compare this to the Kate Middleton of it all.
Yep. I was just about to think that.
Oh, were you?
Yeah, I was thinking that.
I was going to say, because, the silence allows a lot of false information, rumors, and social media. But that was the same back then, not obviously with the social media piece, but if you don't tell people what's going on, they're going to guess and assume and make assumptions. So I think that's a good comparison.
For sure.
Because, again, the same thing as soon as she let people know that it was cancer or cancerous cells. The outpour of support for her was immense.
Right.
And I don't know what would have happened. Nobody knows what would have happened if they had announced that with Alexei, but certainly would have, I think, bought them at least a little bit of public sympathy.
Yeah, for sure. Because just like you said, rumors about him were flowing. They couldn't stop that, even though they didn't have social media. So people wondered if he had some type of deformity, intellectual disability, if he was epileptic. There was all these just questions about, because he was not out in public. So people naturally were wondering what was wrong.
I think the average citizen would think, okay, you finally gave birth to the heir. Wouldn't you want to show him off and all that? So if you're not seeing him, I think that would be the natural assumption.
Exactly. And the other piece about hiding the illness from the public also is a disadvantage for Alexandra, because when she's out in public, her worry over her son shows on her face. I already said earlier that kind of she wears those emotions on her face. And I could imagine I would be the same if I knew this about my son. You're thinking about your son, you're at these events, and your brain is elsewhere. And so while that's what's going on in her brain, the Russians don't know that.
Yeah.
The average people, they take it as more justification of her being cold, like not being as like smiley and friendly with the people, and like, again, haughtiness, thinking she's better than everyone.
Yeah.
So it's this real disconnect.
Yeah. When in reality, she's just worried. She's worried about her son, and she'd rather be there, which I understand, but she has a job to do, like we all do. And she tries to do it, but at the expense of not doing it so great.
Right.
Especially when, your job is to be happy, smiley, beautiful.
Yeah.
Empress Czarina. That's her job.
Obviously, this is where you can pass judgment, and this might be where you're starting to think, not necessarily villain, but how sympathetic, is she as a person? You might be like, she is politically making the obviously wrong decisions. So that might be where the direction you're going, and maybe not. Again, however you think so. But the one thing we can say are these compounding misunderstandings just led to the imperial family to continue to retreat into their world, and then the hatred directed at them.
It's so hard because you understand why they're doing it. I was actually listening to, knowing that we were going to cover this, I was listening to some of the interviews with Helen Rappaport, who I've read books from her. She's written a lot on the Romanovs, and there's always that question of what would have happened if Alexei had been born healthy, the big what if. Not that things weren't inching towards trouble just because of Nicholas and Alexandra both being probably ill-equipped in terms of their personalities and
beliefs, which we'll talk about next.
Yes. So it's not just that, but I think this is such a huge turning point. And what if Alexei had been born healthy? How would that have made the waves of history different?
100%. Yeah, this is definitely one of those defining moments in Russian history and in Alexandra's life. So her childbearing would be over after Alexei, so no more kids.
I will say that she had ginormous reading, like she had like 10-pound babies. They were all so difficult on her.
Yeah, and like her mother, she never was seen as this very healthy, vibrant person. So had done a number on her body and her mind. She was constantly ill when she was pregnant. I had mentioned before, or between her pregnancies, having to lay for days in bed. She had headache, all these things. Sciatica also plagued her. So as someone with chronic pain, it's a little wonder she did not often physically feel up for mingling and throwing balls.
I think that is not talked about enough because she was chronically ill. And I know the sciatica, she supposedly even had it before her marriage, and Queen Victoria, I believe, had sent her like a water cure I had read about. You do think about these moments when people thought she was just being haughty and not wanting to mingle, when in reality she was ill, she was in pain, so she felt like she couldn't go and do those things.
Right. And on top of it, like her mother, she was somebody who, I don't want to say over dramatizes or is a hypochondriac, but she's somebody who, when she feels pain, it's very much,
she's not the one to power through.
No. Yeah. And a lot of times every little ache and pain becomes multiplied.
Mm-hmm.
So very much she took after her mother like that.
She was not a well woman. I know between the sciatica and then I think in later life she had heart pain, heart stuff, and headaches. I think that is a crucial part to mention about her story that sometimes gets overlooked or discounted.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. Well, we'll just end it there with that piece.
Okay.
As a mother, she did take after her own mother, Alice, so she did the damn work. While her mother-in-law, the Empress Dowager, looked on disapprovingly, because that was definitely not how the Russians did it. Alexandra spent so much time in the nursery. One quote mentioned that she was not a Czarina, but only a mother. So, and again, not surprising, especially as I've already mentioned with Alexei, very much into the mother piece. But of course, she is not just a mother. She did have public duties to do as well. And despite her strained relationship with the upper class, the aristocracy, we also can't discount that and think that Alexandra didn't take her job as Czarina seriously. She did philanthropic work.
Mm-hmm.
There we go. She did philanthropic work. And I'm going to talk about this especially more extensively during World War I and a little bit in the Russo-Japanese War. And I feel like, again, this is a spot where they desperately needed a PR person to highlight that. Because when she's doing those things, it's often in the Winter Imperial Palace, and people don't know.
Which is, I feel bad for her because I'm like, you're doing it for the right reasons. You're not doing it for PR. But in this instance, PR would have been so good for them to have been able to tell the Russian public that your Empress is doing, she's doing the damn thing. She's doing the things I think that nowadays we would have more respect for her than, throwing balls and being a lady of society.
For sure. I was talking to my boyfriend, Eric, about this yesterday. And he's like, well, especially today with social media and things like that, people will like if you were a Tsar, Tsarina, right? You'd be plastering all these things, good things that you did, like on that. So not necessarily a lot of times doing it for the right reasons. Again, doing that, like you were saying, for the publicity. Mm-hmm. And while those things don't exist in this time of Russia, of course, it's still a similar piece where she is doing it, from what we can tell, from her genuine caring, because she's not getting anything out of it. If anything, like it's not making her any more popular with the people.
No. So,
PR person, I think definitely needed.
She would have needed it's Taylor Swift PR person, Tree Payne. Tree Payne, get on in there.
One of your ancestors.
Mm-hmm. If only.
Yeah. Here we go. It's another question. If only. And I'm going to move on to chapter 2, which is about how Alexandra viewed her role as Czarina. I already started to hint at that. And the imperial family, as this is going to play obviously a part into the conflicts that follow. Now we're kind of going a little bit back in time, but that's just to set the stage. So after their coronations, Russians thought with the new young Tsar, he's 26, right? Very young. And she's even younger. She's 22. That there would be, I know.
I'm like a 20.
I know.
Me at a 22. 22, what were we doing at 22? Drinking, partying. I mean, not crazy, but I would not have me in a real job like that at 22. No.
I would be throwing the damn balls and all the champagne, and it would be really fun. I would be, if you like the Marie Antoinette especially in the beginning of Sofia Coppola's film.
Yeah, that would be that.
100.
That would be amazing.
So people thought really that there would be more civil reforms to bring Russia out of its really outdated autocratic monarchy past to one that would flourish with modern arts and sciences, as well as bringing in more democratic institutions. It makes sense, right? There's no doubt that Nicholas still saw himself as someone selected by God to rule, but they were still hoping, again, that there could be some changes with these young people, especially with the Czarina having come from and spending a lot of time in England, which I'll bring up in a little bit.
Anytime you have a young person come in, I think there's always a hope that you're like, okay, the old order's done. Somebody's going to come in and shake things up, make it a little bit more fun.
And especially for Russia, as one of those last autocratic monarchies in what we would consider kind of the Western world, it seems like I don't want to say obvious, but in a way,
they were due. They were due.
It was like, this would make sense. When a new czar came to power, it was customary for local officials across the nation to come and make these big declarations of support for the czar. So one of the largest groups were called Zenfas, which give me credit for pronouncing this. And I might have pronounced it wrong.
All the laurel.
And I'm not going to go into great detail about them, but what you should know is they're elected officials. Elections in Russia. Crazy. Elected officials that govern local areas. They were put in place as a compromise. Remember, Nicholas's grandfather, Alexander II, as I said, he was the most liberal of the czars after the end of serfdom. So when serfdom ended, this was another piece of compromise. So they could have...
So they're elected like House of Representatives kind of thing?
No, much smaller than that. This isn't what's going to come out later, like a parliament. It's almost like and I don't want to pretend I know all, like more of like a city government.
Okay. No, that makes sense.
So they'll meet together and such, but it's like very local rule.
Okay, so local versus national.
Yes, exactly. So one group of Zenfas sent a message to him that noted, "We earnestly believe that during your reign, the rights of individuals, as well as those of already existing representative bodies, will be protected permanently and energetically. That these representative bodies will be allowed to voice their opinions in matter in which they are concerned."
Hint, hint.
Yeah.
It's like, this is what you should do, my man.
It's certainly veiled, maybe veiled. Or not really veiled. I don't even want to say challenge.
Like, oh man. It's like, these bastards. I can't believe that they'd ask me.
Right. They're very much saying, hey, you're going to protect us and probably allow more people to voice their opinions, right? Which is obviously a challenge to autocratic powers of the czar. That goes against
I can imagine
everything.
he loved that.
He loved it, yes. As I had said previously, people thought, okay, he's a young man. He's familiar with more of these modern ways. You know, he's visited, obviously, all around Europe. He might be willing to make some more reforms.
I think for most people, you think the younger people are typically more liberal than older people. And you talked about his dad was more conservative after his grandpa. His grandpa was liberal, then his dad was conservative. So they're hoping it's a swing back to liberalism.
Right. However, I think, not that I can obviously read Nicholas's mind, but we do know that he saw his grandfather after his assassination. And I already said he definitely believes he has this divine right, this gift from God. So after he gets this message, he invites representatives of these Zenfos nationwide to the Winter Palace, and he directed some words at that group who specifically had sent that previous message, calling for, their desire for participation, and maybe some internal affairs.
What were the words? Fuck you? More flowery version of fuck you?
Yes. So he called their desire for participation in the internal affairs of Russia a senseless dream.
Oh,
Okay.
yeah. I think fuck you might have been nicer.
Might have been. And to really hit it home, he said, I shall maintain the principle of autocracy just as firmly and unflinchingly as it was preserved by my unforgettable dead father.
No, baby. No.
Yeah.
Wrong decision.
Yeah. Rewind, please. So let's get a different answer. So this was really a shock to people. As I had said, they thought that they could expect some reform.
Yeah. Or at least sweet baby Nicholas, pretend that you're going to be like every other politician and say, yeah, I'll do it, and then not do it.
And even the Tsar's old tutor was equally confused at the tone of Nicholas's speech.
Oh,
Again,
really?
Using the term senseless dream. His old tutor noted, our country's prosperous. It's at peace. What earthly reason was there to suddenly hurl a threat at the head of the entire nation? Valid, right? I mean, I think that's a valid thing. It's like,
I'm with him.
Because, right, Russia, there isn't any threat right now. If anything, the most stable it's been in a while. There's a lot of hope and excitement. So why basically rile up the people or be making this threat?
At the very least, just say, I'll think about it. And then
right.
No.
Exactly. Right. Be like, I appreciate you sharing these words. It will be something we will consider. Right.
Come on, we all know those empty platitude things.
Mm-hmm.
For sure. It's easy to say that. Nobody
as a politician.
He needed to be more of a politician than he was.
100%. When the same old tutor was asked who he thought advised the Tsar to make such a declaration, Nicholas's former tutor noted that it had to be Alexandra, and his characteristic of her was anything but kind. He said she knows nothing, but she thinks she knows everything. She is more autocratic than Peter the Great and perhaps as cruel as Ivan the Terrible. Hers is a small mind that believes it harbors a great intelligence.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
Oh my God. That's the meanest thing I've ever heard.
No.
Wow. Is he just being bitchy about a woman?
I don't know. I mean, I want to connect it back in a way, though, to in the preface of the first episode where I said a former biography on the Russian Revolution had called her an imbecile. There is this idea that she's driving things and she doesn't know what she's doing, which may or not be true.
Yeah, a case can be made. I know we mentioned that imbecile is probably a strong word to use for that, but this is where I'm like, with the tutor, it's like, are you just blaming the woman because you didn't teach the woman?
Right.
And it looks bad on you. If you're a tutor to this guy who's suddenly turning super autocratic, is it that? Or is she really to blame here? This is where I'm kind of scratching my head because I can see both sides. I know that she believes in the autocratic nature of Russia. She's drank the Kool-Aid.
She has. I'll mention here shortly.
But what do you think?
I lean more towards the woman being to blame. I do think, and we know that Alexandra truly believes she understood the situation in Russia and how to rule better than Nicholas, because remember, this is coming at the beginning of his rule. And that means not long before, Nicholas had cried to her about not ready to be Tsar. So she had really took it upon herself to be a strong political presence.
Yeah.
Advisors were fired often on her word, especially if she felt they were a threat to her and Nicholas's connection. Like Nicholas wouldn't be listening to her. So we know Nicholas and Alexandra have a very tight, not just like a romantic marriage connection, but like a ruling power together.
I think like the closest. So think of them as love them or hate them, the Clintons. Yeah, they're very entwined. This is where I'm like, I can't tell because, I don't think that she created this idea in Nicholas. He's been born into an autocratic government, so he knows that, but she doesn't help. We'll say that. She's not whispering in his ear and telling him about constitutional monarchy.
Right. And even though I've done my research, obviously, on Alexandra, I'm by certain no expert. I don't know if there are certain diaries or letters about her thoughts about the autocratic monarchy at this time. But we do know what she thinks a few years later based on the letter to Queen Victoria. So it's hard to say here just after the coronation. Mm-hmm. Sure, obviously she's going to support her husband and his power, but I don't want to make a say of how much she thought, yep, you need to make this huge stand and really let them know, you are in power. Things are not going to change. Autocratic ruling still. If anything, I really do think this is coming from Nicholas. We can't excuse him because, as I said earlier, he saw his grandfather be assassinated. His father was conservative and kept things under wraps and kind of basically tightened things down. And I can see Nicholas wanting to do the same.
I get he's young, he's 26, but he's still a whole ass man. Let's not blame the woman. You said she's 22 years old. I'm sure at this point she's supporting him and his views. And I really don't want to blame a 22-year-old woman who's just married into Russia for this moment in time.
Exactly.
At least at this point.
Especially because we know Nicholas, when he was Tsarevich, that's all he's ever known is that he is going to be the czar and he's going to have all the power. There's never been a conversation about loosening that. So why would he suddenly be like, oh, yeah, let's talk about some things? It's not like he's been meeting with these intellectuals who have these other ideas, things like that. We know he was a really good student. He wasn't trying, I don't think, to change anything in his thinking.
Kids usually reflect their parents' political affiliations.
Yep.
And he was growing up with a father who was on the conservative side. So why would we not think that he would be conservative?
And I think even saying those harsh words, I think because he was young, it's kind of almost that overcompensation.
Yeah.
You're like, I'm a young czar. I'm going to be just nope. You think you can kind of steamroll me because I'm young.
I'm just like my papa. I'm just like my strong papa who could
tear those cards.
Yeah.
Right. So I think, if anything, it's trying to show his strength right at the beginning. Going back to Alexandra, we had already talked about, even though she was really brought up in England, where there had long been a constitutional monarchy. So a check on the monarch, Queen Victoria couldn't just decide what she wanted to do. There's Parliament. Alexandra became a fervent supporter of the autocratic system, one established by God, which makes sense because we know she's very religious. We do know that happened within a short period of time. One thing I do want to stress about this is how she viewed the relationship between the imperial family and the Russian people through that lens. So how I think we can do that is we can look at what she wrote to Queen Victoria. So she once wrote to Queen Victoria. This is a few years into their marriage.
We call her Grandma Vicky.
Grandma Vicky. She wrote to Grandma Vicky that, quote, Russia is not England. Here it is not necessary to make efforts to gain popular affection. End quote.
No. Oh, baby, no. I get that you think that, but this is not going to go well for you.
She thinks these are two totally different things, right? In England, you have to win the affection of the people. That's part of the system, right? Mm-hmm. Because you have these checks and balances. She's like, in Russia, you're chosen by God. So very much they are going to respect and bow down to us and love us just because we are the Tsar and Czarina. We don't have to do anything else.
No,
essentially.
I mean, I understand where she's coming from. I get it, but I'm like, no, don't do this.
I know. Essentially, she believed that the quote unquote true Russians were the agrarian peasants she had seen long ago when she had come to visit Ella, her sister back in the day, who again was married to someone in the Russian aristocracy, when they had gone along and seen these happy peasants waving and smiling at them, that's who she thought were the real Russians, right? These peasants out in the country working to survive, but happy, who loved the Tsar and his family no matter what, because, again, they were chosen by God to rule Russia. And as I move into the next chapter, which will include an event called Bloody Sunday, I want to emphasize who she saw as those real Russians, the happy peasants she imagined, completely devoted to their ruler.
They're like, we don't want anything except for our wonderful rulers. That's all we care about.
The Russians who are in the cities, which when Russia industrializes super quick, other countries, it's like a slow process. Russia, it's like a very quick piece. Russians in the cities were distinctly not part of that group. So they are not the true Russian people. I'm going to get back to that, but just something to keep in mind because for so long, remember, she's very isolated.
City dwellers, nah.
But
peasant,
yeah, right. Because that's what had been 80% of Russia's population for so long.
Mm-hmm.
When they weren't serfs, after serfdom ended, they became peasants. And there really weren't a lot of city workers. And then as you industrialize, that's going to change. Okay, so next chapter, early conflicts. So the Russo-Japanese War and Bloody Sunday. I'm not going to go into the past of Russia and Japan's relationship, but this war starts in 1904 with the Japanese torpedoing 3 Russian ships. So that's like that spark. I do want to note that Cousin Willie, Kaiser Wilhelm II, he really encouraged Nicholas to defend Europe from the threat of what he called, this is coming because of the early 1900s.
Caveat or like asterisk.
Yes, quote, not from me, quote from Kaiser Wilhelm, yellow peril.
No, Kaiser Wilhelm. No.
Right. So Russia, strong Russia, being that Russia is in part in Europe, part in Asia, they are going to defend the rest of Europe.
Yes, they're the wall.
Yeah, they are the wall. So the beginning of the war, if anything, though, is very good for the Czarina and the Tsar because it brings intense patriotism. There's like this scene that's mentioned in the biography where the Tsar and the Czarina are on the balcony of the Winter Palace and Russians are marching there all united. So it's a really good look.
Yeah. I think what we all know, at least usually initially, war is good for patriotism.
Exactly.
Usually after a while, not so much, but at the beginning, yeah.
Right. It depends, obviously, how the war continues, right? Are things going good and not so good?
Exactly.
So Alexandra went into truly running kind of the home front in Russia to support the war. She cancels all social events, all the balls and parties. She's like, war is not a time for that. And she fills the palace's long rooms with tables where women sewed whatever was needed, and they made bandages out of ripped sheets, which they would then
great.
That was sent to the Red Cross.
I mean, it's also a benefit. She's like, I didn't want to do these balls anyway, so I mean, it's not like she was going to do them anyway, but still, bravo! Like, this is exactly what you would want a royal family to be doing during wartime.
Right, because on the other side, if she was throwing these balls while Russians were dying, people would be like, how callous. She's out of touch.
Queen Elizabeth II's parents during World War II, that won them a lot of respect, was living modestly and then doing a lot of the wartime efforts. This is exactly what they should be doing.
Alexandra's supervising this effort every day, but keep in mind, she's still going to keep her distance from ordinary Russians. So the only women who are in the palace are from the nobility. Still, there's this wall, right, between her and the ordinary people. And PR person, people
Tree Payne, get on it.
They don't know what's going on in the palace. They have no clue, right? We're not in the time of social media and things like that. So the palace, all the doors are shut. They don't know what's going on. And it's not like the nobility's going around to the peasants and being like, well, this is what's happening. So it is a smart move as a ruler, but it doesn't buy her any points with her people. She also, this is a more visible piece. She would also accompany Nicholas to St. Petersburg to watch the soldiers go off to war, and she'd pass out holy images to the soldiers. They would bow and such. Again, tying into her immense faith, right? Her being there as they left.
Even if somebody wasn't super religious, you're there to support them.
Things change quick. Public support plummet because things are not going well for Russia. The people absolutely despise the Minister of the Interior, and they blame him for the failures of the war. He's assassinated.
Oh, no.
Yeah. I don't mean to laugh about that, but yeah, the next guy is going to be very scared about being assassinated, which...
Well, yeah, I would
take sense.
I would go out in a Pope mobile if I lived in Russia at this time, because I don't know if you talk about, but even Alexandra's sister, Ella, her husband's assassinated too. I don't remember when, but...
It's right in this time. It's in 1905, but I didn't have it written, but I was going to see if I could tie it in. Ella's husband is assassinated. She ends up then going basically to a convent and living this religious life. She'll come back into the story later. The Russian government's falling apart. Russia should be winning. Russia way outnumbered Japan in numbers, but by 1905, Japan had won, even though Russia ended up actually with really minor losses. So in the end, Russia was not obliterated and lost these huge things.
They weren't destroyed by the war, but it's still a loss.
Right. But it destroyed the people's sense of Russia and who they think they are. Alexandra's crushed. I mean, we know, an emotional person. She cries for hours.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Just because they lost.
So much being tied herself to Russia and Russia losing. It really, I think, hits everybody as like a what the fuck moment in some ways. So biographer King writes that, quote, defeat meant disgrace for the autocracy, end quote. This leads us into one of many different events in world history called Bloody Sunday. This is not the YouTube. I know, everyone, like, let's be a little more creative.
Yeah, why does every massacre have to happen on a Sunday? Come on, guys. Can't we massacre people on a Thursday or something?
Yeah, or somebody pull out a thesaurus and we change bloody to something else.
Yeah. Sanguine or something.
Of course.
I don't know.
It rolls off the tongue so well.
Yeah.
Not that the kids, I think, even maybe know who U2 is. This is not the one that U2 sings about.
Yeah, the kids don't.
People are like,
Matt's a big U2. My husband, shout out husband
I
Matt.
don't have
He loves U2. So Matt, not that Bloody Sunday. Don't even think about it.
Like we have
Don't
to
even think about it. It's not that one.
He's like very mad because he's a history teacher. Of course, he knows it's not that Bloody Sunday.
Yeah, so, I don't care. I'm going to tell you it's not that one.
Before Bloody Sunday happens, there's this ominous event that kind of sets off, I would say, this kind of period. So on January 6th, 1905, the Winter Palace is hit by cannon fire.
Oh, jeez.
There's a ceremony that's going on. So there's priests down kind of below by the palace. They're supposed to be shooting blanks with these cannons. It's not blanks, it's actual cannon fire. Alexandra is hit by shattered glass as the glass windows explode.
Oh my God.
She's covered in debris, but no one in the royal family is actually hurt seriously.
That's terrifying, though.
Only a policeman dies, R.I.P. policeman. But the conclusion was that someone must have accidentally put live shells in the cannon. That's all that was said in the biography. I'm like, accidentally, yes or no? Just how we know so much about assassinations. I'm like,
yeah, maybe not so much, but I mean, I'm surprised that she was only hit by glass and stuff, but still to be there must have been terrifying.
Just having all those glass windows shattering. Either way, whether or not it was an accident or not, this anecdote is a good one, I think, that King shares that kicks off the 1905 revolution and Bloody Sunday. So depending on your level of history knowledge, you might be like, Now, yay, this is where the communists come in, right?
Mhm.
Sorry to burst your bubble. Gonna have to wait a bit for that.
No communists.
No communists yet. Actually, instead, we have a father, like a priest.
Oh, I was like, we have a daddy?
Dad?
We have a dad?
No.
Okay. A
Yeah.
father.
So this revolution is headed by a 32-year-old daddy priest. Not going to call him a daddy priest. Papa priest and a paid police informer named Father Gapon. I don't know if that's a pronunciation, but that's what I'm going to go with. He is very popular among the city workers, aka the not real Russian, the Czarina, and he creates a union.
We do like unions.
We do like unions. So he's good at uniting people. Now you might start thinking, okay, he's going to be ready to assassinate the Tsar or chop the Tsar's head off. Maybe read too much French Revolution stuff like me. Gapon actually thinks highly of the Tsar. He thinks that the Tsar simply doesn't know about the working conditions and living conditions of the people in the city. He thinks the real enemies are those factory owners and other like similarly rich capitalists who are making money off of people.
I mean, he's probably not wrong. I mean, they're also the problem.
Exactly. All of them are wrong. So he's not completely wrong. But I just think that's interesting because when we think of a revolution and events like that, we think naturally, especially with how disliked Tsar Nicholas is by the people, that
so he's not, at this point, he's not trying to overthrow the Tsar. He just thinks he's ill-informed.
Right.
And or that it's the other people that are the problem.
Exactly. In January of 1905, so it's the same time when the Winter Palace was hit by the cannon fire, Gapon goes to visit workers, and he again sees all these horrible conditions, disease, hunger, beds made out of straw, just as bad as the peasants who are living out in the country. The city life is very dire. And he sees this, and he tells the people that next Sunday, he's going to lead a march of workers to the Winter Palace and to the Tsar. So the thought was that Gapon would present the Tsar with their requests. And here are their requests: universal education, universal suffrage for men, obviously. No, nobody else.
Not the girls. I mean,
No.
Come on.
Separation of church and state, which is kind of weird because he's a priest, but I'm going to move on from that. Minimum wage, an 8-hour work week, and an assembly made up of eligible voters. So no women.
No,
but
I'm still good. These are good.
Right.
I'm all for Papa, Daddy.
Yeah. I don't know what exact assembly he was imagining, but I'm guessing it's going to be similar to a parliament type. So while he's not against the Tsar, obviously these things would modernize and very much change Russia's autocratic system.
It's still asking a lot from him.
Right. Separation of church and state, suffrage, so they're being able to vote. Who are they voting for? Again, people in the assembly. So Gapon said if the Tsar did nothing or refused, the request said quite dramatically, quote, "We shall die here before your palace," end quote. So, Aaron, you're Tsar Nicholas. What you gonna do?
I'm gonna murder
you. Haven't gotten this request yet, but you know it's coming. You've heard.
I've heard the hot goss that it's coming.
Yep.
I'd say, I'm sorry, I'm sick. I can't meet with you. That's what I would do, and then not let them near the palace.
Yeah, stay away from me. So the government, I'm not talking about the Tsar yet, headed by a new minister of the interior who really wants to stay alive. The previous one, again, was assassinated.
Isn't that's all of our wishes,
right,
not to get assassinated.
Right, in our jobs. So very aware of the situation. And he's like, Nicholas, this is what you got to do. He drafts a decree with some very minor reforms for the Tsar to sign. I'm talking about like government insurance for workers, less government interference. So obviously that's not going to stop the workers. That's very, very minor. So the workers are still going to be coming in. So extra soldiers are brought in, kind of like you were saying about being protected. They're going to be brought in, and they're told that the workers want to murder the imperial family.
Oh.
which
Was that
is
true?
not. Well,
That's not true.
No, right. I mean, they said, "We shall die here before your palace," which sounds really dramatic, but nothing was said in there that they were trying to target and kill the imperial family. In fact, Nicholas wasn't even there.
Okay, so they're getting bad information.
Yeah, and we can't say if they had pushed past and gone into the palace that they wouldn't have harmed his family.
Mhm.
That wasn't the reason for their marching.
Mm-hmm.
On January 22nd, a Sunday in 1905, 200,000.
Always a Sunday.
Always Sunday. Yep. Maybe it's because for the priest. Kapan is like, let's do it on a Sunday. 200,000 Russians march towards the palace, and the soldiers do what they're ordered to do, and they fire on the crowd of men, but also women and children. Never a good look, right?
No, I mean, if you're already in sort of a PR crisis, killing women, children, and men is usually never a good thing.
Right. So banners and all these things are flying. There's chaos. At the end of it, supposedly only 92 people were killed. This is very much doubted, that number.
Yeah, I'm like, that seems like a low ball.
But to be fair, it really didn't matter the number, because the people of St. Petersburg were stunned because they had just seen their czar fire on his own people, even though he was not the one to give the order.
Yeah, that's never going to endear you to, especially if people are already predisposed to not liking you. You know, there's already some suspicion. This is disaster for them.
Right. He's fired and killed his own Russian children, men, women. And even worse, it was done during a peaceful demonstration. The Bolshevik Leon Trotsky actually, after this event, had said the revolution has begun, even though, spoiler alert, still not going to happen for another about 12 years. So Gapon actually survives, but now he's less idealistic.
I don't blame him.
I don't know.
Like, okay, now I have a problem with you, Nikki. Now I've got a problem with you.
I know he calls Tsar Nicholas like a soulless murderer or something like that. Alexandra, she's stunned as well. And she also feels like she can't talk to Nicholas because he's in a way darker space. What she does do is her influence over Nicholas just becomes more immense, because she comes to this realization that Nicholas still needs a lot of help being czar. So his dad didn't teach him. She thought over time he was going to pick it up. And she's basically like, I think I'm going to have to kind of pick up what's left.
Yeah.
Because Nicholas is in a Great Depression, and obviously she's like, he needs some big help.
Yeah.
So cue the training montage, but in Russian.
Eye of the tiger,
Right.
it's the thrill of the fight.
But in
That's so
Russian,
fun.
just again to remember, the people who she saw march on the palace weren't who Alexander perceived as those real Russians. Right, those are the city workers. So she's going to have more control over Nicholas. I don't want to say that Nicholas is a puppet by any means, but she's not going to be quiet about things.
Yeah.
She's definitely going to be more assertive.
I think that's important. I don't want to let Nicholas off the hook, because I do think a lot of times that Alexandra gets such a bad rap because she is the more assertive of the pair. But again, he's a full-ass man.
Yeah,
He's
she's not the
czar.
puppet master, yeah.
Yeah, he's the czar. Let's not blame the lady in these situations. I know she does things that doesn't make things better, we'll say, but I hate when we let the men off the hook.
100%, yeah. So our next and last chapter for part 2, drum roll. Next chapter, Rasputin. There we go.
This is what I think the part everybody's been waiting for, because if anybody knows something about the Romanovs and Alexander, it's probably having to do with Rasputin.
You probably can see him in your brain right now, right? The long beard, those like really intense eyes.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so the question you might be asking, obviously I already knew the connection with Rasputin, but you might be like...
Yes, the question is, yes, I would have sex with Rasputin if I could. Right. No.
You'd probably get some.
No.
You'd probably get some STD.
I know. I'm just kidding.
No,
That's not the question.
although he would say that would help you.
I know.
I
know that is part of his thing.
Philosophy, yeah. So actually he would be like, yes, have sex with me because that's going to lead to your salvation. I thought, and probably everybody thinks, so how does this guy, if you have that picture, I even have a short reel on Rasputin, how does this guy, an orgy-loving drunk peasant, make it into our story?
Mm-hmm. It's so improbable. I guess Alexandra does love herself a peasant, at least in the theoretical.
Right. So I'm going to start first with a book called The Friends of God. It's actually a medieval religious movement that believed suffering and humility were needed for salvation, which definitely sounds medieval.
They're like, guys, I know you're suffering.
I know you're dying because of the Black Death, but you know what?
But it's what if it was good?
Yeah. So basically, when bad things happen, it's not that God's left you. He's showing his love for you.
I mean, that's a thing. That
or,
could be.
In other words, if a lot of bad shit happened to you, it meant you were one of his favorites.
They're like, your whole family died of the Black Death. He just really loves you.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, you're his favorite baby.
You're in the top 5. There you go. Sounds a bit like an abusive relationship to me, but we'll move on from that.
Yeah.
Does not sound healthy, but we know that Alexandra not only owned the book, but she was trying to get her friends to read it.
Oh, really? That was her book club.
But we know there's some connection to this with her beliefs, which would make sense because she's going through a lot of suffering between her son and all this. And so instead of feeling
her own health complaints and everything else that's going on. Yeah, I could see why that would appeal to somebody like her.
So instead of thinking God has abandoned me because my son has hemophilia, the autocracy, our monarchy is falling apart, I'm ill, things just seem like at their worst, thinking that God hasn't abandoned her. He's still there. Okay. Before Rasputin enters the picture, I just want to also get some context. Keep in mind that the Orthodox Church in Russia was filled with these wandering holy men who would say they could cure or save or produce miracles. So it was not at all unusual for a person like Rasputin to show up and actually have the church embrace him at first.
I think that's important. And I know you'll talk about later, but it is important to note that he's not the only one and she's not the only one who will be using his services. I think a lot of times we think they're isolated incidents, him and her accepting it, but that is very much not the case.
It's not odd at all to seek from a holy man miracles. And so it wouldn't be odd for Alexandra to do that. And Rasputin is, well, I'm going to talk about Rasputin.
Yeah.
Beyond just the holy men, saying they could help and cure things, there were some who were on these religious quests. Also, monks who saw themselves as spiritual guides, the most powerful in society. So that relationship between high society and the church very much interlinked.
Mm-hmm.
So there is this fascination with like miracles and I don't want to say magic, but that like miracles and all of these things, like the power of prayer, all of that in the 20th century, the church was embracing it. They weren't like, these people are not us.
To put it in context, even in America and the UK and such at this time, you also see things like spiritualism is a big at this time, seances and stuff. So let's not just say it's just the Russian Orthodox Church. At this time, all those things are very much being practiced and people are very into that.
So this fascination with a mysterious peasant who ends up, in her view, helping heal her son wasn't something odd for Alexandra to be into. That doesn't mean not problematic with what he brings to the palace, but on its surface, that piece is not unusual.
I think it's important to put it in context.
Exactly. And of course, I mentioned healing her son because, of course, it would have to do with Alexei. Because when the doctors could do nothing, she turned to religion even more. And she was essentially in that perfect mindset, right, for someone to come in and offer her the support that the doctors could not. And I don't want to say that Rasputin necessarily came in and brainwashed her or she had no agency, but you also have to think where she's at. The doctors can't do anything. She's so frustrated at the doctors. She just thinks they're idiots.
Like, if anything, they're harming him more. They're doing more harm than good.
Right. And so she's just turning more and more to religion, prayer, basically praying for him and hoping a miracle will happen. I'm not going to go into Rasputin's biography too much because based on the poll, it looks like I'm going to cover him on the show, which will be nice because then I won't have to give so much background content.
Yeah.
Like, hopefully you've listened to this before that. There's no requirement, but there'll be a quiz. No, just kidding.
You are a former teacher, so you're not opposed to giving a pop quiz.
I am not. But I will give a few biographical facts before he comes to the royal family. So he's a peasant. He's from Siberia, so way the hell out there. As a young man, his job required him to move from town to town, which is where he first gets his reputation as basically a man whore. That's a nice way to say it.
He definitely did not discriminate when it came to screwing anything that moved.
Right. And I'm not going to go too much into consensual, non-consensual, and things like that because, again, it's not his episode. But during one of his journeys, he's traveling around. He comes to a special monastery. I'm not even going to attempt to pronounce it now because it
doesn't matter.
Yeah,
it's a monastery.
Yeah, right. And I'll go into those details when it's his episode. So when he's sentenced to jail time for stealing from a neighbor, he asks if he can spend his time in the monastery instead of jail. And they actually let him. But this is where he's going to see some crazy stuff and start to be like, the group that he sees there, again, I'm not going to go into their details and things like that. He's not going to ever be part of that group because he's this mystic. He takes things, right, from all these different groups. So he definitely takes quite a few things from this group. They're a group who wildly beat themselves as worship. And there's a whole lot of sex.
Self-flagellation. In both senses of the word.
Exactly. Right. A whole lot of sex. Pretty much follow every other thing that they did. So why? You might be asking. Before they could reach God, they said sin had to be committed first and then confessed.
Love it.
I'm surprised no church has taken that on.
Yeah, they're like, I mean,
I've got to do a lot of sinning first before I can
sorry guys, I got some sinning to do and
got some orgies to go to. Yeah, I love that justification.
The efforts that men will go to in order to explain why they're like just screwing everything that moves.
Right. You're married, doesn't matter. You have to commit a sin, right? So his time there is interesting. He eventually does leave the monastery. He doesn't join this monastery.
Although I'm surprised with all the orgies. I'm surprised.
But he takes some of their ideas, right? He's like, ooh, interesting. I'm going to maybe put that into my little bucket of my beliefs.
Yeah. He takes the orgy part with him.
I know.
Not some of the other stuff. It's so weird.
So strange. I know. Really weird. I'm going to skip over his marriage. He does get married and he has kids. I kind of forgot about that. And I'm basically going to come to the part where he becomes this religious figure. Supposedly, he sees a vision of Virgin Mary, who told him to become a pilgrim and walk to the Holy Land. So he does that. He walks to the Holy Land, which is, I mean, to me, pretty impressive.
I wouldn't.
Because hard enough for me to,
it's hard enough for me to walk to the mailbox and back. I'm really out of shape.
I know, I feel you. A misconception is that Rasputin was a monk or, again, part of the church. Nope. He's a wandering peasant looking for his own salvation and whatever adventures come his way.
Yeah, he's often called the Mad Monk, but he was not a monk.
Right. Not
No.
that people didn't use that nickname, but he's not a monk.
Yeah, he's loosely affiliated with the church, but not in any official capacity.
Exactly. Another misconception, I don't know why I really felt the need to disprove this one, but I think in that wheelhouse of peasants being dirty and smelly and things like that, that's where this misconception came about, because it kind of undermines him, makes him seem even more gross. He did bathe. There were stories that like he never bathed and he stunk.
Yeah, that
horribly.
he smelled. Yeah, well, I do think it's important to say, because I think with Rasputin especially, it's easy to give in to the rumors, as he's such a wild figure.
Yeah.
So the rumors are plenty, and there's a lot that we can truthfully condemn him for and judge. Being a creep with women, for one, but not the bathing part.
Right. And as I said, there's definitely a classist element to this. It's him being a peasant with these stories.
A peasant from Siberia, even.
Exactly. But as Aaron said, there are plenty of true stories that I'm not at all trying to say he's the same by any means.
Nope.
He first arrives in St. Petersburg in 1903. And unsurprisingly, he attracts attention right away, pretty much from the highest clergy in the church. And just to go back and remind you, remember, this isn't a new thing for the Russian Orthodox Church at all. And especially the one in St. Petersburg, the strange-looking peasant is their normal. They have these peasants coming through all the time, and they're like, ooh, exciting. Yeah. Very exciting. There were mixed feelings about him, unsurprisingly, among the nobility. But two grand duchesses recommend Rasputin to the Tsar and Czarina, and he makes his way to the Alexandra Palace. Alexei's only one at this time. You might be like, oh, this is where he really enters the picture. Nope, actually not. So he doesn't grab the Tsar and Czarina right away. He meets them, but he's not part of their picture yet. So I'm going to go back to Alexei now, because he's getting older. His life is one that's pretty much covered in bubble wrap, both like by his mom and kind of by necessity. He actually has two large Russian bodyguards. Kind of funny. I mean, also not surprising.
Well, like, you can't do anything fun. I'm sorry. Right. That would be so hard, especially for a small child, to be
pretty
like,
much.
Sorry, you can't do anything fun.
Well, and that's the problem. That's the problem. They can't protect him from normal childhood injuries. There's this sad story I want to tell where Alexei really wanted a bicycle. He had this tricycle, obviously way safer, where you're not going to fall. And he begs Alexandra, mom, and of course she says no. And he says, why can other boys have everything and I nothing?
Oh.
Now, of course, this is a bit privileged because he has a whole bunch of shit.
Yeah, I'll give it to him. Because he's a baby.
Right.
A baby, and that would be
hard.
He
doesn't know otherwise, yeah. But it's definitely like rich people problems. But yeah, he doesn't understand. You can still understand his sadness.
I think that's that he knows he can't play and do all the things that even his sisters can.
Right. So as he grows up, again, we're talking about like ages 6, 7, 8. I'm not talking like 15 or anything. He is tall and he's called very thoughtful. There's some stories of him being very thoughtful with his sisters, which is cute. Yeah. And he's surprisingly good-natured, especially with all that and what happened to him. You would think he wouldn't be good-natured.
Yeah.
So he almost kind of deserves that Sunny nickname that Alexandra had. So does Rasputin immediately start healing Alexei? We don't really know. We don't have an exact time of this is where Rasputin for sure came into the picture aligned with Alexei. It seems like Rasputin first came to the palace informally more than once, and he didn't take to the Tsarevich only, so he was with all the other children.
Well, and he was probably more of a spiritual guide.
Right. So he'd pray with them. All the children seemed to like him, but it's not like he was right away being like, I can heal your son. Yeah. But we also don't have answers of kind of when did that come into the picture. So we don't have like a certain age for Alexei or a date. But I will note an early story where the healing seems to have begun. So this is a story that's told by Nicholas's sister, Olga. This is what she witnessed. So Alexei, after an incident, was in horrific pain. That's actually what she's saying, but paraphrasing what she said. Dark blue patches under his eyes and his legs incredibly swollen. Doctors don't know what to do. Alexandra supposedly sends for Rasputin, and he gets to the palace way past midnight, so late into the night. And in the morning, Olga gets back up. She returns to Alexei's room, and she's shocked to see that not only is Alexei alive, but his fever's gone. He's got no sign of swelling. Alexandra told Olga that Rasputin hadn't even touched the Tsarevich. He just stood at the end of the bed and prayed.
I can imagine, especially if this is one of the early times that he does this, that I can imagine how powerful this moment is for Alexandra, who this is the first time that something has been able to heal him. Medicine hasn't, but this, mystic has.
Right. This is what she's been praying for a miracle. And the Orthodox Church says prayer and miracles are still happening. So she thinks this is what's going on. You might be asking yourself, well, what the fuck? Like, how did he do that? That's what I asked myself. And honestly, historians don't know the answers. I'll go into different theories in the Rasputin episode, but there are a lot of theories, some of them wild, some more realistic. As I said, I'm going to go into them more in his own episode. But what we can say for sure is that Rasputin, without a doubt, brought relief to Alexei during his fits.
Yeah.
And there's too many accounts to discount that. And even people who really hated Rasputin admitted that part.
I think from what I've read and listened to different historians, they've all emphasized Rasputin, as crazy and weird as he wasn't a quack. He was not a quack. He did whatever way he was able to heal. He did apparently do something for them.
So I think this is just really interesting because when I was younger, I always had the impression that, he was a quack and that he really wasn't healing Alexei. It was just like her perception of that. Like, oh, he's feeling better. But maybe Alexei saying, yeah, I'm feeling better, but not really. But that's not the case. There are many stories where Alexei is close to death. I'm going to share one. Rasputin comes in and Alexei survives. Again, I can't give you answers.
Yeah, and you can see how important this would be for her. She's such a nervous person, and to finally feel like you have an answer, and it's him. And doctors have not been able to give you one, but this man has.
So what does matter is that Alexandra believed Rasputin could heal her son through prayer, and she saw this as a miracle. And as I said, these were both touted as real things by the Orthodox Church. So it's not that she's this crazy person who's like, it's a miracle that this is happening, healing through prayer. Those are things that the Orthodox Church were saying could happen.
And she saw with her own eyes.
Yeah. And Alexandra didn't become obsessed with Rasputin's power to heal at first. So it's not like right after this incident or other incidents that he was like at the palace all the time. It really took a few years before she'd call him to the palace regularly. But obviously, over time, her devotion to her son led to her dependence on him. Even as others confronted her with some of his very ungodly actions outside the palace, she was unmoved. And I think the biographer King notes this really well. I like this quote. Quote, she never confused the man with the gift, end quote.
Yeah, and I think more than anything, she had such a small world, such a small group of friends that she could confide in. Yeah, I know that Rasputin served that friend role as well. So Rasputin, great bestie. What I don't understand here is when Lorraine becomes under so much pressure and she knows what the rumors and the press are doing, this is where you can say she's bringing her whole family down with her. So I know the why she clung to him, but it's still maddening when she does herself no favor.
Yeah. And talking about friendship, another constant visitor to the palace was Alexandra's, what they call one true friend, Anna, who Alexandra had actually met during a hospital visit. She was quite a few years younger than her. I want to use what King uses to describe her. It's vicious. Okay. He describes her as, quote, short, dumpy, and round-faced.
We don't talk about women like that. I'm sorry.
Rude. Yeah, rude. Like that's the first.
I want to see
introduction of her.
you. I'm sorry. I know this isn't about biographer King, but I want to see you, and we'll see how round-faced and dumpy you are.
Yeah. So I don't love that. But what does matter, she's not noble. She does not come from nobility, high society. And they were shocked that she's going in the palace, right? The Czarina is inviting her in. We know how much the Czarina is closed off. The royal family's closed off. They're like,
excuse me? Like, she gets to go in? Yeah.
None of us are coming in, but you're inviting Rasputin and Anna?
She's so distrustful of people, and then seeing that our next figure, who I'll be doing, we'll see something really similar, where the nobles are not cool with royalty consorting with the common people, the horror. I can see why they're unhappy with that development, but I also can see why she needs people that she can depend on. Yeah. Again, we talked about that world growing smaller. I'm not going to say that Alexandra's bad for having a bestie. Again, I mean, even if your besties are Rasputin and somebody who's not nobility.
Especially for somebody who's had so much tragedy and despair and probably depression. I'm not going to diagnose her, but to have a friend who isn't, your husband, part of your family, like, I think that is...
I'm seeing parallels. I'm seeing parallels to Carolyn Bessette Kennedy, who we covered last, where none of us know what it's like living in that fishbowl and living in that environment. I would not say anything against somebody finding people who she can depend on and trust.
And Alexandra, I don't have the exact quote, but just the excitement of having her come to the palace, like this was somebody who she really did trust and view as a friend. She very much saw her as this true friend. So Alexandra does give her a title to get the nobles off her back, but it's
I'm sure they loved that.
Yeah, but it's too late, right? They're with the imperial family so closed off, and they're letting in the nobody. They're already insulted, right? You can't take back that being insulted. Because she was so close to Alexandra, she was seen as this extension of Alexandra. And what I mean by that is because Anna would go around St. Petersburg and talk. And she was like just sharing things.
Anna,
keep your mouth shut.
Now I'm side-eyeing Anna. Anna, I was rooting for you.
No, I don't think she was, though, doing it in a malicious way by any means. I think she was just a talker. Her and Rasputin
love the gab.
Yeah, and her and Rasputin are connected too. She's going to be the go-between Rasputin and the royal family. So I don't think it's malicious. I think it's just her personality, and she just doesn't even think about it. What she gives off and what she says, because the people in the city don't see Alexandra, but they see Anna, they're going to be like, oh, that must be what Alexandra believes.
Yeah.
Right. And so, for example, Anna, as I said, was not discreet. And while Alexandra was keeping Rasputin's influence a secret, she wasn't trying to broadcast this to everybody. Anna was flaunting it. So soon everybody in St. Petersburg knew about this connection to Rasputin with the imperial family. As I said, she became a go-between for the Czarina and Rasputin. And soon she was as hated as Czarina was, as I said, as an extension. So she's also disliked. Like anybody who is connected, right, is going to have that baggage. Alexandra's sister, Ella, as I said, at this time, a widow. She's, again, very religious, part of this convent. Alexandra's sister sees this all going on. And she comes to Alexandra and she asked if she knew how the people saw Rasputin and how much his association with her was damaging the royal family. And supposedly Alexandra just sat there like all uptight, kind of, that that look of when you're,
She's defensive.
yes, very defensive. You're definitely not open to this conversation. And the only thing she said to Ella was that Ella should be less critical of a man of God, gets up and leaves. And after this encounter, the sisters rarely spoke again.
That's sad, especially knowing how it ends for both of them. It's really sad. But this is where I'm like, I get the why Alexandra is leaning on Rasputin. But when she's getting the information that it is damaging, not just to her, but to the entire family and the idea of the autocracy, the monarchy as a whole, this is where you would hope that she would prioritize. If you want that to continue, you're going to have to make some tough decision.
Right. But you know, with how much she is revolved her life around Alexei, you know, as long as Rasputin is helping, she's not going to be able to let him go. Even she's being told left and right that it's damaging. She's just not able to do it.
You did say in part 1, if people have not listened to part 1, which, guys, go back, listen to it, that she is very stubborn.
Yes. So Rasputin this whole time while in St. Petersburg, he's still pursuing women everywhere. Remember, he takes on that whole sin committed before salvation.
I got to send my way through St. Petersburg.
Right. There's a group of people who believe him, and like even married women.
I know.
There's like these stories of, you know, that do go and sleep with him, but that's because they believe this whole thing. That's where obviously it like get a little icky, but we're not going to talk about that here. But what we are going to talk about is the church now is like, oh, we're going to distance ourselves from you, which is fair. Right. And since he's a peasant, right, he's not a monk. He isn't tied directly to the church. So it's not like the church is like excommunicating him or like, I'm taking away your title. They've just been cozied up to him. And now they're just like, no, not so much.
We're going to keep you at an arm's length.
Right. Now, we have mentioned a very important figure in a while. How does Nicholas feel about Rasputin? So, interesting. Let's see. How does he feel? So, Nicholas, he saw how Rasputin gave Alexandra hope and eased her suffering. This quote, I think, sums it up. Better one Rasputin than 10 fits of hysterics a day.
Happy wife, happy life.
Exactly. He probably has that like on a sweatshirt.
Yeah, I'm sure he's got that decorated in the Winter Palace.
Yeah. Rasputin doesn't help himself by bragging, saying like, the Tsar bows down to me, he kneels to me, he often kisses the Czarina. There are all these rumors about Rasputin and Alexandra being lovers. Right. Most people, again, really doubt that piece. But it is part of this issue that Nicholas and Alexandra had. They never believed that Rasputin was a pious man. Not like they ever thought he didn't have sin. But if they admitted why they kept Rasputin so close, it would mean speaking about Alexei's condition, which again, still kept secret.
Yeah. So they were not going to speak about Alexei's condition. And so then Rasputin was there. But without
why? Why is he there? Why? Right? There's all these questions of why. It doesn't make sense to the Russian people. That, I think, fair, right? They see this interesting peasant magic, right? Guy going into the palace, and they have no clue for what for, but they know he's there a whole lot.
They know the stories. They know the stories about him and what he's up to in St. Petersburg and all that.
Right.
And then, you're not getting any information from the palace. In that void, rumors are going to spread.
Right. Nobody's going to be like, oh, he's there healing Alexei. Like, again, the people do not know about his condition. So there's none of that. So if Nicholas and Alexandra come out and say it, might give them, I don't think at this point, total understanding, but there would be an explanation.
Yeah, it would give them at least some breathing room.
Yeah. And Rasputin, obviously, embellishes these stories, often when he's drunk and to other important people. Clear exaggerations. But it's not always the truth that matters. It's about what people believe. Eventually it gets to the point where the Tsar has had enough, and he actually sends Rasputin off to a pilgrimage to the Holy Land in 1911.
Bye, Rasputin.
Like, can't take it anymore. Go do your pilgrimage. Out. But the newspapers, when Rasputin was still there, and at this point, they're relentless with stories about Rasputin because obviously it's old copies. There's so much you can say about him. So it got to the point where eventually the Tsar said that any paper printing stories about Rasputin would be fined. And the newspaper still printed the stories and they took the fine because they were like, this
was probably still profitable, even if you're fined.
Right. And really anyone in the government who spoke ill of Rasputin often found themselves dismissed by the Czarina. There's just, as we said, the connection and where they're not going to any negatives about him. Everyone seemed to see the harm that Rasputin was doing to the royal family, except the royal family. Yeah. The Dowager Empress noted, "My poor daughter-in-law does not perceive that she is ruining both the dynasty and herself. She sincerely believes in the holiness of an adventurer, and we are powerless to ward off the misfortune which is sure to come."
This makes it so complicated because she genuinely believes that he's helping Alexei, and we do see that he but to what harm to the reputation of the royal family.
Right.
So you're keeping your son alive, but will he have a throne to rule at that point?
Exactly. And all these people are seeing this, right? Ella, Alexandra's sister. This is Nicholas's mom, who's like, what is she doing? How can she not see this? Now, unfortunately, it's going to be the last part. This is going to be the part where Rasputin is going to very much take, if anything, more hold over the royal family. He's only going to become more intertwined with the family when the royal family visits one of their hunting lodges in Poland in 1912. And Alexandra wants Alexei with the fresh air. She wants him to go on this carriage ride, not realizing how bad the terrain was. And so he starts hemorrhaging, with internal bleeding from all the bumps. He starts hemorrhaging, especially from the stomach. He's screaming and he's moaning. And as a mom, this is what kills me. He's moaning, "Mama, help me." And he says, "When I'm dead, it will not hurt anymore, will it, Mama?"
Oh my God.
Right.
Yeah. At that point, as a parent, you would do anything to help them.
Yeah. And so Alexandra sends a telegram to Rasputin. The same day, doctors said he might die at any moment and that the Tsar and Tsarina need to finally consent to a bulletin on the state of the Tsarevich's health. First, there's a bulletin printed about that he is near death, does not note his disease, just his condition.
Okay.
So very important there. Doesn't say he's a hemophiliac, just notes that he's in grave condition. Last rites were actually given to him, and a bulletin was prepared for the next day to announce Alexei's death. That's how close to death he was.
Wow.
So Alexandra, she waits for Rasputin's answer. Finally, it does come, and it said, quote, "The little one will not die. Do not allow the doctors to bother him too much," end quote. Suddenly, Alexandra is calm, almost happy looking, even as others are literally discussing funeral arrangements in front of her. She's so convinced, nope, this is what Rasputin said. He's not going to die. The next morning, the swelling began to disappear in his leg. The hemorrhaging had stopped. After this, any hesitation Alexandra had in calling for Rasputin was gone. Even the doctor, Dr. Feodorovna, later said, quote, "And look, Rasputin would come in, walk up to the patient, look at him and spit. The bleeding would stop in no time. How could the Empress not trust Rasputin after that?"
Yeah, and I know you'll talk about it in his episode, but I know a lot of times because, the poking, the prodding, and giving him ibuprofen, which is a blood thinner, which would be bad for a hemophiliac when their blood does not clot. So I know all of that would create greater issues. I do think also the fact that Alexandra calmed down when he was there and when she received word from him. And I'm sure that had some sort of effect on Alexei, that his mom was not so worked up about it.
Right. But there's still something to be said about the fact that he was that close to death and like last rites given, bulletin ready to be sent that Lazarevich is dead and swelling stops. I'm drinking the Kool-Aid.
Come on, Rasputin, come on in.
Yeah.
How does he do with depression and other
maladies? I'm going to end part 2 here. We're recording this on Sunday. So this upcoming week, we'll release the final part 3, which will cover World War I and the abdication and the death of the Romanovs. Please, hopefully, come back for that. I know asking for a 3-part series is a lot to listen to. 3 very long parts, but all of them really crucial to being able to see Alexandra for who she is. And I think these stories are invaluable to that. So as Aaron said in the beginning, I really did not want to cut it down and make it kind of just glossed over. I think to truly understand her, we need to go into somewhat some depth, which we did here.
Absolutely. Yep. I'm ready. I'm ready for part 3.
Our goal, I would say, would be to release it on Wednesday, but stay tuned to Instagram. That always is going to give you the most up-to-date information. So check out Instagram sometime this week for sure. And then we'll have a regular episode coming out that following week. Aaron, once I'm finally done with this. You guys are getting more, you're getting more content. So hopefully that's enjoyable to you.
Yeah, that's not a bad thing.
Right. And we enjoy, obviously, telling these stories. Thank you again for listening to a whole lot of Russian history. And we really, as we said, appreciate you listening in and hope that you follow or share with friends or like certain posts on Instagram. All of that is really fun for us to see and help us interact. And Patreon, as I said, is another way that you can support the show in a small way and interact with us as well. Anything else you want to say, Aaron, before we log on off?
Nope. I am ready for part 3. I want to hear more Russian history.
Sounds good. So thank you, everybody. Have a good whatever part of the day you're at, and we will see you again for part 3.
Bye, guys.
Bye.